Are you here to hurt our mama too? The little girl's voice cracked through the blizzard like breaking glass. Blood stained the snow around the overturned wagon. A dying woman clutched 4 terrified children against the Colorado cold. And standing above them, silent, bearded, wild, was a man who hadn't spoken in 7 years. This is their story. Before we begin, please subscribe and follow this journey to the end. Comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The wind screamed. That's what Elias Boon would remember later. Not the cold, not the darkness, but the wind. It screamed like the dying had screamed at Shiloh, at Antietam, at every godforsaken battlefield where he'd knelt in blood and tried to save men who were already gone. But this scream was different. This scream was a child. Elias stopped mid-step, his snowshoes sinking into the fresh powder. He'd been heading back to his cabin with a deer carcass slung over his shoulder, looking forward to nothing more than his fire and his silence. 7 years he'd lived up here in these mountains. 7 years without saying a word to another human soul, and he'd been content with that. The scream came again, thinner this time, like it was running out of strength. His hand moved to the rifle on his back, then stopped. Something in that sound wasn't threatening. It was terrified. Elias adjusted the deer on his shoulder and turned toward the cry. The blizzard had picked up in the last hour, turning the world into a swirling wall of white. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but he'd learned to read these mountains the way other men read books. The cry was coming from the old wagon road, the one that ran along the ridge before dropping down toward Silverstone. Nobody used that road in winter. Nobody with any sense, anyway. He moved faster, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. The wind tore at his beard, at the fur collar of his coat. Snow had already accumulated 6 inches deep from this morning, and it wasn't stopping. Then he saw it. The wagon was on its side, half buried in a drift where the road curved along a steep drop. One wheel was still spinning slowly. The horses were gone, either run off or fallen over the edge, he couldn't tell which. And huddled against the overturned wagon bed, barely visible in the storm, were shapes. Small shapes. Elias dropped the deer and ran. As he got closer, the scene crystallized into something that made his chest tighten. 4 children ranging from maybe 7 down to what couldn't be more than 2 years old. They were clustered around a woman who lay motionless in the snow, her dress torn, her face, bruised, blood seeping from a wound on her head. The oldest child, a girl with dark hair plastered to her face, looked up at his approach. Her eyes went wide with terror. "Stay back!" she screamed, throwing her arms around the smaller children. "Stay away from us!" Elias stopped, raising his hands slowly. He knew what he looked like, 6'3", beard down to his chest, dressed in furs and leather, a knife on his belt, and a rifle on his back. He looked like something out of a nightmare. The girl was shaking, but she didn't back down. She had a rock in one hand, held up like a weapon. "You can't have us," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't." He shook his head slowly, keeping his hands up. "Are you here to hurt our mama too?" The words came out in a sob. "She's dying. Please, please just leave us alone." The woman on the ground stirred slightly, her lips moving. The girl immediately dropped down beside her. "Mama, Mama, I'm here." Elias took a careful step forward. The girl tensed, but she was torn now between protecting her mother and protecting her siblings. He could see it in her face, that impossible choice no child should ever have to make. He knelt slowly in the snow, making himself smaller, less threatening. Then he did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He opened his mouth to speak. Nothing came out. The words were there somewhere deep inside, but they'd been locked away so long he couldn't find the key. His throat worked. His lips moved, but only silence emerged. The girl stared at him, confused and afraid. Elias tried again, forcing the words up through years of deliberate quiet. It came out as barely a whisper, rough and broken, and then his voice failed completely. He closed his eyes, frustrated with himself, with his damaged throat, with everything. Then he opened them and did the only thing he could. He reached very slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a small slate and piece of chalk, the tools he used to keep supply lists to mark his trap lines. With cold, numbed fingers, he wrote, "Not here to hurt, here to help." He held it up for the girl to see. She squinted at it, her lips moving as she read. You can't talk." He shook his head. "Why not?" He erased the slate with his sleeve and wrote again, "Doesn't matter, your mother needs help now." The girl looked down at her mother, then at the 3 younger children pressed against her sides. A boy of maybe 5, another girl of 3, and a tiny boy who might have been 2. They were all shivering violently. "We had a wagon," the girl said, her voice small. "We were going to Denver. But men came. They hurt Mama. They pushed us off the road. I think they wanted to kill us." Elias felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. He wrote, "How long ago?" "I don't know, hours maybe. It's hard to tell. Everything happened so fast." He looked at the woman Clara the girl had called her. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale beneath the bruises. The head wound had stopped bleeding, but she was going into shock. In this cold, with 4 children and no shelter, they'd all be dead by morning. Elias stood and moved toward Clara. The oldest girl tensed, but she didn't try to stop him. She'd made a calculation, he realized. They were going to die out here without help. A scary stranger was better than certain death. He knelt beside Clara and checked her pulse, thready but present. The head wound wasn't as bad as it looked, but she had other injuries. Bruises on her neck, defensive wounds on her arms. Someone had hurt this woman deliberately, violently. He looked up at the 4 children watching him with enormous eyes. The smallest boy was crying softly, a tired whimper that said he'd been crying for a long time. Elias wrote on his slate, "I have a cabin, 1-hour walk. I can carry your mother. Can you walk?" The oldest girl read it, then nodded. "I'm Anna," she said. "This is Thomas Mary and baby Samuel. We can walk. We can help." Something in her voice, the determination, the fierce protectiveness, reminded him of the young soldiers he'd known during the war, the ones who'd been forced to grow up too fast. He nodded and erased the slate. Then he wrote, "Wrap Samuel in mother's coat. Thomas and Mary hold hands. Anna, stay close to me." The girl Anna moved immediately, organizing her siblings with an efficiency that broke his heart. She was 7 years old and acting like a general. Elias removed his heavy fur coat and wrapped it around Clara, then lifted her carefully. She was lighter than he expected, all bone and muscle and determined survival. Even unconscious, her hand moved toward where her children had been. "It's okay, Mama," Anna whispered, touching her mother's hand. "We're going somewhere safe now, I think." She looked up at Elias uncertainly. He wished he could tell her it would be all right. Instead, he just nodded and started walking. The journey back to his cabin was brutal. The blizzard had reached its peak, wind howling through the trees, snow falling so thick he could barely see his own feet. He knew these trails by instinct now, by the feel of the ground beneath his snowshoes, by the shape of the trees in the darkness. Behind him, he could hear the children struggling. Anna was carrying Samuel, the baby, wrapped in their mother's coat. Thomas and Mary held hands, stumbling through drifts that came up to their waists. Every few minutes, he'd stop and turn to check on them. Every time, Anna would look up at him with those fierce, determined eyes and nod that they could keep going. She reminded him of someone. It took him half the journey to remember who, a young nurse at the field hospital in Tennessee. Catherine had been her name. She'd been 18 years old and had worked alongside him during the worst of the fighting, never complaining, never breaking down, no matter how many soldiers died on her watch. Catherine had died when the hospital tent caught fire. Elias had been 3 miles away, tending to wounded men in a church basement. By the time he'd gotten back, there was nothing left but ash and memory. He pushed the thought away and kept walking. His cabin finally emerged from the darkness like something out of a dream, a solid structure of logs and stone smoke rising from the chimney. He'd kept the fire banked and it would still be warm inside. Elias kicked the door open and carried Clara inside, laying her gently on his bed. The 4 children stumbled in behind him, snow-covered and shaking. "Close the door," Anna said to Thomas, and the boy did, pushing against the wind until the latch caught. The cabin was small but well made. One room with a fireplace, a bed, a table, shelves lined with books and medical supplies. The children stood in a huddle, dripping snow onto his floor, staring around with wide eyes. Elias moved quickly. He built up the fire until it roared, then hung a pot of snow to melt for water. He pulled blankets from his chest and handed them to Anna. "Wrap your siblings," he wrote on his slate. "Get them warm." She did, moving with that same heartbreaking efficiency. While she worked, Elias examined Clara more carefully in the firelight. The head wound was superficial. Scalp wounds always bled dramatically, but there were other injuries, bruised ribs, possibly cracked, the marks on her throat, and something else, a desperation in the way she'd been clutching her children even unconscious. This woman hadn't just been in an accident, she'd been attacked. Elias cleaned the head wound and wrapped it, then checked her pupils and pulse. She'd be all right physically, but the psychological trauma that would take longer to heal, he knew that from experience. Is she going to die? He turned to find Anna standing beside him, her face pale. Elias shook his head firmly and wrote, "No, she needs rest. She will wake." "When? Soon, hours maybe." Anna nodded slowly, processing this. Then she said, "Thank you for helping us, even though we're strangers." He looked at this 7-year-old girl who'd somehow kept her siblings alive through violence and a blizzard, and he thought about all the ways the world could break a person, all the ways it had broken him. He wrote, "You are safe here." Something in Anna's face crumbled. Just for a moment, the fierce protectiveness fell away, and she was just a scared little girl. "Promise?" Elias hesitated. He'd learned not to make promises. Promises were just another way to fail people, another way to add to the weight of his guilt. But Anna was looking at him with those enormous eyes, and her siblings were huddled by the fire, and their mother was lying unconscious in his bed because someone had tried to kill them. He wrote, "I promise." Anna started crying, then not loud, scared crying, but quiet, exhausted sobs. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold it in, trying to stay strong. Elias did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He reached out and put his hand gently on her shoulder. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do. I tried to keep them warm, but I didn't know what to do." He squeezed her shoulder gently, wishing he could speak, wishing he could tell her she'd done everything right, that she'd been brave and strong and had saved her siblings' lives. Instead, he wrote, "You did good. You kept them alive. You are very brave." Anna read it, nodded, and wiped her eyes. Then she took a shaky breath and went back to her siblings, helping them out of their wet clothes and into the blankets. Elias watched them for a moment, then turned his attention to practical matters. The children needed food. He had venison stew from yesterday, and he put it on to warm. He made them tea with honey. He found dry clothes. His old shirts would work as nightgowns for now. While the children ate, he cleaned and checked their injuries. Minor frostbite on Thomas's ears, a bruise on Mary's arm. Samuel was the worst off, too young to understand, crying for his mother, exhausted and frightened. Anna held the baby while Elias worked, rocking him gently. "Mama always sang to him," she said, "but I don't remember the words anymore." Elias paused, then went to his bookshelf. He pulled down an old book, a collection of folk songs his mother had given him before he'd left for the war. He opened it to a lullaby and showed it to Anna. She read it slowly, her lips moving, then started singing in a small, uncertain voice. Samuel quieted his crying, fading to hiccups. By the time the children had eaten and been tended to, it was well past midnight. Elias made them pallets on the floor near the fire, and they collapsed into sleep almost immediately. All except Anna. She lay awake, watching her mother. Elias sat beside the bed, checking Clara's pulse every few minutes. He'd cleaned the blood from her face, and he could see now that she'd been beautiful once. Still was underneath the bruises. She had strong features, dark hair, work-roughened hands, a woman who'd known hardship. "My papa is dead," Anna said suddenly into the quiet. "That's why those men came. They wanted something Papa had, and when Mama wouldn't give it to them, they hurt her." Elias looked at the girl. She was staring at the ceiling, her voice flat. "Papa was good," Anna continued. "He was smart. He worked in the mines, but he was an engineer. He could look at a mountain and tell you what was inside it. He used to show me his drawings, all these lines and numbers that showed where the silver was." She paused. "The men who hurt Mama, they asked about Papa's notebook. They said if she gave it to them, they'd let us go. But Mama said she didn't have it. She said Papa destroyed it before he died." Elias pulled out his slate. "Did he?" Anna looked at him for a long moment. Then very quietly she said, "I don't think so. I think Mama hid it, but I don't know where. He wrote, 'Why do they want it?' I don't know, but it's important. Important enough to kill for." Her voice wavered. "Papa didn't just die, did he? I heard Mama and Aunt Ruth talking. They said it was an accident at the mine, but Mama was crying, and she said it wasn't. She said they killed him because he knew too much." Elias felt that cold weight in his stomach again. A dead engineer, a violent attack, a notebook important enough to murder a family over. He'd left the world behind 7 years ago, specifically to avoid this kind of darkness, and now it had followed him home. He wrote, "Rest, now. Tomorrow we figure out what to do." But Anna shook her head. "Those men, they didn't die in the blizzard. They're not stupid. They'll wait for the storm to pass, and then they'll come looking for us. They'll find the wagon. They'll follow our tracks." She was right. Elias knew she was right. The storm had bought them time, but not safety. He erased his slate and wrote carefully, "Then I will keep you safe. All of you." "Why?" Anna asked. "You don't know us. We're nothing to you." Elias looked at this child, this fierce, brave, terrified child, and he thought about all the people he hadn't been able to save. All the soldiers who died despite his best efforts. Catherine burning in that tent. The family he'd left behind when he'd fled into these mountains, unable to bear the weight of the world anymore. He'd thought silence was safety. He'd thought isolation was peace. But looking at Anna and her siblings, at their mother fighting to survive, he realized he'd been wrong. Silence wasn't peace. It was just surrender. He wrote, "Because it is the right thing to do." Anna studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She lay back down, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and closed her eyes. But Elias saw her hand move under the blanket, reaching out to touch her mother's hand where it hung off the side of the bed. "Don't let them take us," she whispered. Elias sat in the firelight watching over 5 people who'd stumbled into his life through a blizzard, and he knew with absolute certainty that everything had just changed. The wind howled outside, the fire crackled, and somewhere out there in the darkness, men with violence in their hearts were waiting for morning. Clara stirred her lips, moving, and Elias leaned closer to hear. "John," she whispered, "John, the children." Her eyes opened suddenly, wild with panic. She tried to sit up, gasping, her hands reaching for her children. "Shh," Elias tried to say, but only a rough sound came out. Clara's eyes found him, and terror flooded her face. She opened her mouth to scream. Anna shot up from her pallet. "Mama, Mama, it's okay. He saved us." Clara's scream died in her throat. She looked at her daughter, at the cabin, at the other children, sleeping by the fire. Her hand went to her head, touching the bandage. "Anna." Her voice was rough, confused. What happened?" "The wagon crashed, Mama, in the storm. We were going to freeze, but this man found us. He carried you here. He gave us food and blankets." Anna moved to the bedside, taking her mother's hand. "He can't talk, but he's nice, Mama. He promised we're safe." Clara's eyes moved to Elias, still wary but less terrified. She was assessing him. He realized, cataloging the medical supplies on his shelves, the books, the careful way he'd bandaged her head. "You're a doctor," she said. It wasn't a question. Elias hesitated, then nodded. "Why can't you speak?" He picked up his slate and wrote "War, long story." Clara read it, then looked at him again, really looked at him. "You were at the war." He nodded. "Which side? Union. Field surgeon." Something in Clara's face softened slightly. "My husband," her voice broke. "My husband fought for the Union. He was at Gettysburg." Elias wrote, "I was there too. After the battle, 3 days of the wounded." Clara closed her eyes and tears leaked from the corners. He never talked about it much. When he came home he was different, but he was still good. He was still John. She opened her eyes looking at Elias. "Are you still good?" It was a fair question, an important question. Elias thought about the 7 years he'd spent hiding from the world, from responsibility, from connection. He thought about the man he'd been before the war. Idealistic, hopeful, believing he could save everyone. The war had taught him he couldn't save everyone, but maybe, just maybe, he could save someone. He wrote, "I am trying to be." Clara read it, then looked at her children. Anna watching anxiously, the younger ones sleeping peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. "Those men who attacked us," she said, her voice low. "They work for Ezra Maxwell. He owns the Silverstone mine and half the territory besides. My husband discovered something Maxwell doesn't want anyone to know. John tried to take it to the authorities in Denver, but Maxwell has the territorial governor in his pocket." She paused, her hand going to her throat, touching the bruises there. "John died 3 weeks ago. They said it was an accident in the mine, but it wasn't. They killed him because of what he knew, and now they want to make sure his family can't tell anyone." Elias wrote, "What did he know?" Clara shook her head. "I can't tell you. I won't put you in danger too. You've done enough helping us. When the storm breaks, we'll leave. We'll find another way." But Anna said, "Mama, we can't. You're hurt, and they'll be waiting for us." "Then we'll wait them out. We'll hide until what?" Anna's voice was fierce. "Until we freeze, until they find us, Mama. We need help." Clara looked at her daughter, and Elias could see the war happening inside her, the desire to protect her children versus the impossibility of doing it alone. He wrote, "Tell me, I want to help." "Why?" Clara asked, echoing Anna's earlier question. "You don't know us." Elias looked at the two of them, the woman who'd survived violence to protect her children, the girl who'd kept her siblings alive through a blizzard. He thought about all his reasons for hiding, for staying silent, for turning away from the world. And he realized that every single one of those reasons was just fear dressed up as wisdom. He erased his slate and wrote slowly, carefully, "I have been silent too long. Some things cannot be ignored." Clara read it, and something in her face broke open. Not fear this time, something like hope. "John found out Maxwell is mining on protected Ute land," she said quietly. "Not just trespassing, destroying sacred sites. And he's not just mining for silver. There's gold there too, and Maxwell has been hiding it from the Ute tribe, from the government, from everyone. John kept records, maps, surveys, proof. He kept it all in a notebook." "Where is the notebook?" Elias wrote. Clara looked at her sleeping children. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere Maxwell would never think to look." Anna followed her mother's gaze, and her eyes widened. "Mary's doll," she whispered. Clara nodded. "Inside the stuffing. John hollowed it out and hid the notebook there the day before he died. He knew something was wrong. He knew they were coming for him." Elias looked at the 3-year-old girl sleeping by the fire, clutching a worn rag doll to her chest. Inside that doll was evidence powerful enough to bring down an empire, and outside in the darkness, men with violence in their hearts were waiting to take it. He wrote, "Then we protect the doll, and we get you all to Denver." "It's 200 miles, Clara said. "In winter, with 4 children and a wounded woman, it's impossible." "Nothing is impossible, just difficult." Clara laughed, but it came out as something closer to a sob. "You sound like John. He used to say that. Nothing's impossible, Clara, just difficult. She looked at Elias, really looked at him, and he saw her making a decision. All right, she said, we trust you. God help us, we trust you. Elias nodded and stood. He went to his trunk and pulled out his old medical bag, the one he'd carried through the war. Inside were instruments he hadn't touched in 7 years, scalpels and forceps and suture needles. And beneath them, carefully wrapped his service revolver. He'd sworn he'd never touch a weapon again. He'd sworn he was done with violence. But some promises were made to be broken. Outside, the wind was dying down. The blizzard was passing. And when dawn came, the real storm would begin. Dawn came cold and quiet. Elias hadn't slept. He'd sat by the window all night, watching the darkness thin to gray, listening to the wind fade to nothing. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind 3 feet of fresh snow, and a silence so complete it felt like the world was holding its breath. Clara had drifted in and out of consciousness, her body demanding rest even as her mind fought against it. Each time she woke, her first movement was to reach for her children, to count them in the darkness, to reassure herself they were still breathing. Anna hadn't really slept either. Elias could tell by the way she lay too still, her breathing too controlled. She was listening, waiting, ready to spring up at the first sign of danger. The child had learned not to trust safety. That broke something in him. When the first light touched the mountains, Elias stood and checked his rifle. He'd cleaned it the night before, loaded it, set it within arm's reach. Now he picked it up and moved to the door. "Where are you going?" Anna was sitting up, her eyes wide. Elias held up one finger, wait, and slipped outside. The morning was crystalline and brutal. The sun hadn't cleared the peaks yet, but the sky was already that hard, bright blue that meant bone-deep cold. The snow reflected the light, turning everything into a landscape of white and shadow. Elias circled the cabin slowly, reading the ground. His own tracks from last night were already half filled with fresh snow. But if anyone had approached during the blizzard, there would be signs. Broken branches, displaced snow, the subtle wrongness that meant human presence. He found nothing. The cabin sat in its clearing like it had for the past 7 years, isolated, forgotten, safe. But that safety was an illusion now. Maxwell's men would come. It was just a question of when. Elias went to where he'd dropped the deer carcass last night and hauled it back to the cabin. At least they'd have food. He'd need to butcher it, smoke some of the meat, make preparations. Preparations for what? A siege. A run through the mountains. A fight. He pushed the questions away and went back inside. The children were waking now. Mary sat up, rubbing her eyes, still clutching her doll. Samuel was crying softly, and Thomas was trying to comfort him with whispered words that didn't seem to be working. Clara struggled to sit up, her face tight with pain. "Don't," Anna said, moving to her mother's side. "The man said you need rest." "The man has a name, surely," Clara said, looking at Elias. He pulled out his slate and wrote, "Elias Boon." "Elias?" Clara repeated. "That's a good name, biblical. The prophet who heard God in the whisper, not the earthquake." Elias hadn't thought about the meaning of his name in years. His mother had chosen it, hoping her son would grow up to be wise and faithful. He wondered what she'd think of him now, mute, hiding, broken. Clara was watching him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You're going to check the wagon, aren't you, to see if they're following?" He nodded. "It's dangerous." He wrote, "Everything is dangerous now." "Take me with you," Anna said suddenly. "I can help. I can watch for—" "No." Clara's voice was sharp. "Absolutely not. Mama, I can—" "No." Clara reached out and took her daughter's hand. "Anna, you've been so brave. You've been so strong, but you're still a child, and I can't—" Her voice broke. "I can't lose you too." Anna's face crumpled, but she nodded. "Okay, Mama." Elias watched this exchange and felt the weight of it. This family had already lost so much. A husband, a father, their home, their safety. Every decision now carried the possibility of more loss. He wrote, "I will be careful. I will come back." "You can't promise that," Clara said quietly. "You are right. but I will try." He pulled on his heavy coat, took his rifle, and headed for the door. As he opened it, Anna's voice stopped him. "Mr. Boon, Elias." She was standing now, holding Mary's doll. "If something happens, if they come here, what should we do?" Elias looked at the 4 children, at Clara struggling to stand, despite her injuries, at the impossible situation he'd walked into by choosing to help instead of walking away. He wrote quickly, "Root cellar, outside north side of cabin, hidden under snow. If trouble comes, hide there. Do not come out until I return." Anna read it, memorized it, nodded. "We'll be ready." She was 7 years old and already planning for violence. The unfairness of it made Elias's chest tight. He nodded once more and left. The journey to where he'd found the wagon took over an hour. The snow was deep, and even with snowshoes, every step was work. But the morning was clear, and he could see for miles. If anyone was moving in these mountains, he'd spot them. The wagon was where he'd left it, half buried now in the drift. The exposed wood was already crusted with ice. Elias circled it carefully, studying the ground. There, tracks from yesterday already fading under the new snow. Hoof prints, boot prints, at least 3 horses, maybe 4. The tracks led away from the wagon back toward the main road, then disappeared under the fresh snowfall. They'd left before the worst of the blizzard hit. Smart, but they'd be back. Elias climbed down to where the wagon had overturned and searched through the wreckage. Most of the family's belongings were scattered or buried. He found a few things worth salvaging: a quilt, some cooking pots, a small trunk of clothes. He loaded what he could carry onto his back. Then he found something that made him stop. A photograph protected in a leather frame, half buried in the snow. He picked it up and brushed it clean. A family. A man with kind eyes and an engineer's careful posture, standing behind a seated woman, Clara, younger, smiling. 4 children arranged around them, Anna in a white dress, the younger ones barely more than babies. This was what had been destroyed, this moment of happiness frozen in silver and glass. Elias tucked the photograph inside his coat against his heart. He was turning to leave when he heard it, the distant sound of horses. He dropped into a crouch behind the overturned wagon, his rifle already coming up. The sound was coming from the east, from the direction of Silverstone. Multiple horses moving slowly through the deep snow. They were searching. Elias counted his options. He could try to get back to the cabin before they found his trail, but his tracks from this morning were clear in the fresh snow. They'd follow them straight to his door. He could engage them here, but he didn't know how many there were, and fighting in the open was suicide. Or he could lead them away. The horses were getting closer. Elias made his decision. He stood up deliberately and started walking away from the wagon, not toward his cabin, but south along the ridge. He walked slowly enough to leave clear tracks, fast enough to put distance between himself and the riders. Behind him he heard shouting. They'd spotted him by him. Elias didn't run. Running would make them suspicious, would make them think he had something to hide. Instead, he kept walking at a steady pace, a lone trapper heading home from checking his lines. The horses came faster now. Elias counted 4 riders from the sound. He chose his ground carefully. A narrow section of trail with steep drops on either side. Trees close enough to provide cover. When he reached it, he stepped off the trail and vanished into the trees. The riders came around the bend minutes later. Elias watched them from behind a massive pine, his rifle steady. 4 men, as he'd guessed. 3 looked like hired, muscle-thick necks, hard faces, hands that knew violence. The 4th was different. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man used to being in charge. Well-dressed, despite the cold. A fur coat that probably cost more than most men earned in a year. "I know you're there," the well-dressed man called out. His voice was educated, almost pleasant. "No need for games, we just want to talk." Elias stayed silent. "We're looking for a woman and 4 children. There was an accident yesterday during the storm. We're concerned for their safety." Concerned enough to push them off a cliff, Elias thought. "If you've seen them, if you've helped them, we'd be grateful for information. There'd be a reward, of course." The well-dressed man waited, but Elias didn't move. All right then, the man said, his voice hardening slightly. Let me be more direct. The woman has something that belongs to my employer. We need it back. And we need to ensure certain information doesn't reach Denver. Now you seem like a reasonable man, a smart man, smart enough to know when to mind his own business. One of the hired men leaned over and whispered something. The well-dressed man nodded. My associate tells me there's a cabin about 2 miles northwest of here. Belongs to some hermit who keeps to himself. That wouldn't be you, would it? Elias felt his grip tighten on the rifle. Here's what's going to happen, the man continued. We're going to ride to that cabin. We're going to search it. And if we find what we're looking for, everyone walks away. Simple as that. He paused, then added, but if someone gets in our way, if someone tries to be a hero, well, heroes have a bad habit of dying in these mountains. Accidents happen. Blizzards are deadly. People disappear. It's a shame, but that's the wilderness for you. The threat was clear. Cooperate or die. Elias stepped out from behind the tree. The 4 men's hands went to their weapons, but Elias held his rifle pointed down, non-threatening. He wanted them to see him, to see he was alone, to see he wasn't running. The well-dressed man smiled. There you are. Now shall we have a civilized conversation? Elias pulled out his slate and wrote, No woman here, no children, just me. He held it up. The well-dressed man's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. You'll forgive me if I don't take your word for it. Jackson Blackwood checked the cabin. Bring back anything interesting. 2 of the hired men spurred their horses forward. They'd follow Elias's trail straight back to his cabin, straight to Clara and the children. Elias stepped into the middle of the trail, blocking their path. Move, one of them, Jackson apparently said. He was a big man, scarred and mean-looking. Elias shook his head. I said move. Jackson reached for something on his belt, not a gun but a club. The well-dressed man sighed. Unnecessary violence is so distasteful, but if you insist on being difficult. He nodded to his men. Jackson and the other man, one of the Blackwoods, dismounted. They moved with the easy confidence of men who'd done this before, who'd beaten information and compliance out of people and never lost sleep over it. Elias set down his rifle carefully. Then he pulled out his knife. Jackson laughed. You're going to fight us with a knife, old man. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Elias didn't respond. He couldn't. But he shifted his stance, weight, balanced knife held low and ready. He'd learned to fight in the war, not the gentleman's fighting of duels and honor, but the brutal, desperate fighting of field hospitals overrun by the enemy. He'd learned from soldiers who'd survived hand-to-hand combat, from men who fought not to win medals, but to stay alive. Jackson came at him first, the club swinging in a wide arc meant to crush bone. Elias stepped inside the swing, drove his shoulder into Jackson's chest, and slashed once, twice across the man's weapon arm. Jackson screamed and dropped the club. Elias spun away as the Blackwood brother lunged at him, barely avoiding the knife that whistled past his ribs. The fight was brief and vicious. Elias moved with economy, wasting no motion, targeting joints and tendons, using his knife not to kill, but to disable. Within 2 minutes, both hired men were on the ground, bleeding, cursing, no longer a threat. Elias picked up his rifle and pointed it at the well-dressed man who'd watched the whole thing with an expression of mild interest. Impressive, the man said. You're not just some hermit, are you? Military training. Medical precision in those cuts. You knew exactly where to hit. So what are you? A deserter, a man running from something. Elias wrote one-handed, keeping the rifle trained. Leave. Do not come back. The well-dressed man read it and smiled. I'm afraid I can't do that. My name is Warren, by the way. Dr. Peter Warren. I used to be a surgeon like you, I suspect. Now I work for Mr. Maxwell, ensuring certain problems get resolved quietly. He paused. I'm going to be honest with you. The woman and her children are going to die. If not today, then tomorrow. If not by my hand, then by someone else's. Maxwell has too much at stake to let them live. The only question is whether you die with them." Elias felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. This man, this doctor who'd taken an oath to heal, was calmly discussing murdering children. He wrote, "I know you, Tennessee, Field Hospital, 1863. Warren's smile froze. He leaned forward, studying Elias's face. "My God. Boon, Elias Boon, I thought you were dead. Everyone said you died after Chattanooga." "I should have. We saved a lot of men together, you and I." Warren's voice was almost nostalgic. "Remember that lieutenant with the stomach wound, 48 hours of surgery? We got him through it. He died anyway, infection, 2 weeks later. They all died eventually." Warren said, his voice hardening. "That's what I learned. Everyone dies. The only question is whether you profit from it first." Elias shook his head slowly. "Don't judge me," Warren snapped. "You ran away, Boone. You hid in these mountains because you couldn't handle the reality of what we saw. I adapted. I survived. I made something of myself. You became a killer. I became practical." Warren gathered his reins. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ride back to Silverstone and tell Mr. Maxwell that you're harboring his property. He'll send 20 men, 30, however many it takes, and they'll burn your cabin to the ground with everyone inside it." He paused. "Unless you give me what I want. The notebook. That's all Maxwell cares about. Give me the notebook and the woman and her children can go free. Hell, we'll even give you money for your trouble." Elias didn't lower the rifle, but he also didn't fire. Warren saw the hesitation and smiled. "Think about it, Boone. Is a dead man's research worth dying for, worth letting 4 innocent children die?" Warren turned his horse. "You have until tomorrow. After that, we come with fire." He rode away, leaving his 2 injured men crawling in the snow. Elias watched him disappear down the trail, then looked at Jackson and Blackwood. They looked back at him with hatred and fear. Elias wrote on his slate, "Go. Tell your employer what happened. Tell him to send his men. But tell him this too, I will not run." Jackson spat blood in the snow. "You're dead, old man. You and everyone with you." Elias didn't respond. He just stood there, rifle in hand, until the 2 men had crawled to their horses and ridden away. Then he turned and ran. The cabin was quiet when he got back. Too quiet. Elias's heart hammered as he pushed through the door. "It's me," he tried to say, but only a hoarse whisper came out. Anna's head popped up from behind the table where she'd been hiding with a kitchen knife. "Elias, we heard horses. We thought—" "We were ready to go to the cellar," Clara said from the bed. She was sitting up now, pale but alert. "But they didn't come this way." Elias nodded and wrote, "I led them away, but they know you are here. They will come back." "How many?" Clara asked. 4. I injured 2. But their leader, Dr. Warren, he will bring more." "Warren," Clara's face went white. "Peter Warren, he was with them." Elias nodded. "Oh, God." Clara pressed her hands to her face. Warren was John's friend. They worked together. John trusted him. He must have told Warren about the notebook, must have. She looked up, her eyes bright with tears and rage. "He betrayed my husband. He helped Maxwell kill him." Thomas had started crying quietly. Mary joined him, not understanding but absorbing the fear in the room. Samuel was already wailing, exhausted by days of terror he was too young to comprehend. Anna moved among her siblings, trying to comfort them, but Elias could see the strain on her face. She was reaching her breaking point. He knelt down beside Clara's bed and wrote, "We cannot stay here. We must run." "Where?" Clara demanded. "We're 200 miles from Denver. I can barely walk." "The children, the Ute. Their winter camp is 40 miles north. Walking Bear knows me. He will help." Clara stared at him. "The Ute. You know them. I healed the chief's son 3 years ago. Fever almost killed him. They call me the silent medicine man. And you think they'll shelter us, protect us from Maxwell? They have more reason to hate Maxwell than anyone. He is stealing their land." Clara closed her eyes, thinking. When she opened them, there was steel in her gaze. "All right, we run, but Elias, if they catch us, they will not. You can't promise that." Elias looked at her, at this woman who'd survived her husband's murder and her own near death, who'd kept her children alive through violence and cold, who still had the strength to question and challenge and demand honesty. He wrote, "You are right. I cannot promise, but I can try, and I can fight, and I will not let them take your children." Clara held his gaze for a long moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over his, the first time she'd voluntarily touched him. "John would have liked you," she said quietly. "He always said the best men are the ones who do what's right, even when it costs them everything." Elias felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 7 years. He squeezed her hand gently, then stood and began preparations. They worked through the afternoon. Elias butchered what he could of the deer, packed dried meat and supplies. He found his old army haversack, filled it with medical supplies. He gave Clara the photograph he'd recovered, and she pressed it to her chest without speaking. Anna helped without being asked, moving with that heart-breaking competence. She packed clothes for her siblings, made sure Mary's doll was safe, sang softly to Samuel to keep him calm. "Anna," Clara said at one point, "you don't have to be so strong all the time. It's okay to be scared." "If I'm scared, they're scared," Anna said, nodding at her younger siblings. "So I can't be scared yet." Yet. The word hung in the air like a promise of breaking. As the sun began to set, Elias went outside and stared toward the south, toward Silverstone. No smoke yet, no riders, but they'd come. Tomorrow if Warren kept his word, maybe tonight if he didn't. Elias thought about the cabin he'd built with his own hands, the sanctuary he'd created from the wreckage of his old life. He'd been so certain that isolation was the answer, that silence was safety. But standing here now, knowing that inside were 5 people depending on him, he understood that he'd been wrong about everything. Safety wasn't in hiding, it was in standing up. Peace wasn't in silence, it was in speaking truth, even when your voice was broken. He went back inside and found Clara trying to stand, testing her strength. She made it 3 steps before her legs buckled. Elias caught her. "I'll slow you down," she said, frustrated, furious with her own weakness. Elias shook his head and wrote, "I will carry you if I have to. 40 miles if necessary." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're either very brave or very stupid." Both Elias wrote and was rewarded with a real smile. They ate a meal together as the darkness came on. Elias watched the children, Thomas trying to be brave like his sister Mary, clutching her doll, Samuel falling asleep in Anna's arms. A family shattered by greed and violence, held together by love and determination. And him, the broken doctor who couldn't speak, who'd run from the world and found himself right back in the middle of its darkness. "Tell me about the war," Clara said quietly while the children dozed. "Tell me what made you stop speaking." Elias hesitated, then picked up his slate. He'd never told anyone this story, never written it down, but something about Clara made him want to try. Chattanooga, 1863. Field hospital was overrun. I was operating on a soldier, just a boy, maybe 17. Enemy broke through. I kept working. Thought if I saved him it would matter. Thought it would mean something. He paused, the chalk trembling slightly. Soldier died anyway. Bullet through the tent. Random, meaningless. I opened my mouth to scream, and nothing came out. Never came back. Clara read it and tears slipped down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you went through that." Everyone went through it. I just couldn't handle it. "That's not weakness, Elias. That's being human." He looked at her, this woman who'd lost her husband, been beaten and hunted, nearly died protecting her children, and still had the capacity for empathy, for gentleness. "Do you think you'll ever speak again?" she asked. He wrote, "I do not know. Sometimes I think the words are still there. Other times I think they burned away." "Maybe they're just waiting," Clara said. "Waiting for the right moment, the right reason." Before he could respond, Anna sat up suddenly. "Someone's coming." Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. He moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. Nothing, just the wind in the trees, the snow reflecting starlight. "I heard horses," Anna insisted, "far away but coming closer." Elias trusted her. Children heard things adults missed, noticed things adults ignored. He wrote quickly, "Root cellar, now." Clara struggled to her feet and Anna gathered her siblings. They moved quickly, quietly, years of survival instinct kicking in. Elias led them outside to the north side of the cabin. He'd built the root cellar, carefully disguising it, making sure it would be invisible unless you knew where to look. He swept away the snow and pulled open the hidden door. "Down," he whispered, his broken voice barely audible. Clara went first, helping the children down the ladder. Anna was last. She looked up at Elias and he saw the question in her eyes. "You're coming too, right?" He shook his head, but he held up his slate. "I will lead them away again. I will come back. Promise." "You promised we'd be safe," Anna said, her voice breaking. "You promised. I know, and you will be, but only if I do this." Anna grabbed his hand, squeezed it hard. Then she climbed down into the cellar. Elias closed the door and covered it with snow. By the time he finished, you couldn't tell it was there. Then he went back into the cabin, loaded his rifle, and waited. The horses came 20 minutes later, not tomorrow, tonight. Warren had lied about the deadline, counting on surprise. Elias smiled grimly. He'd expected that. He heard them surrounding the cabin, boots crunching in snow. Whispered commands, the metallic click of guns being cocked. Then Warren's voice, "Boon, we know you're in there. Come out and let's talk like reasonable men." Elias stayed silent, counting positions by sound. At least 8 men, maybe more, all armed. "We don't want to burn you out, but we will. Last chance." Elias picked up a lamp, turned up the wick, and threw it against the wall. The oil caught instantly, flames spreading across the dry wood. Then he grabbed his rifle and medical bag, kicked open the back door, and ran into the night. Behind him, men shouted in confusion as the cabin began to burn. He heard them crashing through the door, searching for him, searching for the notebook, for the children, for anything valuable. They'd find nothing but flames. Elias ran north, away from the cellar, away from everything he was trying to protect. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs screamed, until the burning cabin was just a glow behind him. Then he stopped, turned, and waited. They'd follow. Warren wouldn't give up that easily. And when they did, Elias would lead them deeper into the mountains, farther from Clara and the children, closer to the Ute winter camp where he might, just might, find allies. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke and burning pine. Elias checked his rifle, counted his ammunition, and prepared for a war he'd thought he'd left behind. Behind him, voices cut through the night, sharp with anger and confusion. Elias could hear Warren shouting orders, could hear men cursing as they realized the cabin was empty except for flames and smoke. "Find him, he can't have gone far." Elias crouched behind a boulder, his breath coming in white clouds. The burning cabin cast long shadows across the snow, turning the forest into a maze of orange light and black darkness. He counted at least 6 men spreading out from the fire, searching. 2 more were trying to salvage what they could from the flames, looking for the notebook they'd never find. Warren stood in the center of it all, his face illuminated by the fire, and even from this distance Elias could see the cold fury there. This wasn't just about the notebook anymore. This was personal. Warren had been embarrassed, outsmarted, made to look foolish in front of his employer's men. Men like Warren didn't forgive that kind of humiliation. "Spread out," Warren commanded. "He's on foot, wounded from earlier. He can't have gone more than 100 yards. Find his tracks." Elias looked down at the snow around him, at the clear trail he'd left running from the cabin. They'd find it in minutes. He needed to move. Needed to lead them away from where Clara and the children were hiding in the cellar. He fired once, the shot cracking through the night like a whip. One of the lanterns near the cabin exploded, plunging that section into darkness. Men shouted and dove for cover, "Their north side," Warren pointed. "Jackson, Blackwood, take your brothers and flank him, the rest of you straight pursuit." Elias was already running again, pushing through the deep snow, using the trees for cover. His lungs burned with the cold air. His legs ached, but he kept moving. Behind him he could hear the pursuit men crashing through the brush, horses whinnying as riders tried to navigate the forest in darkness. A bullet whined past his head and buried itself in a tree trunk. Too close. They were getting better at tracking him, adjusting to the darkness. Elias changed direction, angling west now, then north again, making his trail as confusing as possible. He needed them to follow, but not catch him. Needed to stay just out of reach while pulling them farther from the cabin. Another shot. This one kicked up snow at his feet. He dove behind a fallen log and returned fire, aiming high, not trying to kill, but to slow them down. The muzzle flash gave away his position, but it also forced them to take cover, bought him precious seconds. He ran again. The forest grew thicker here, the trees closer together. Elias knew this terrain had spent 7 years learning every trail, every boulder, every hidden ravine. He used that knowledge now, leading his pursuers into the difficult ground, forcing them to slow down, to question every shadow. "He's heading for the cliffs," someone shouted. "Cut him off at the ridge." Good. Let them think that. The cliffs were 2 miles east. If they split their forces to cover both directions, it would thin them out, make them vulnerable. Elias heard horses moving off to his right, the flanking party. He counted 3 riders from the sound. That left Warren and maybe 3 others on foot directly behind him. Better odds. Not good odds, but better. He stopped in a small clearing, breathing hard, listening. The pursuit had gone quieter. They were being more careful now, trying to sneak up on him. Elias pulled out his slate and wrote by moonlight, even though no one was there to read it. "Clara, if you find this, head north to Walking Bear. Tell him Silent Medicine Man sent you. He will understand." He left the slate propped against a tree, where it might be found, then moved on. The forest opened up ahead into a series of rocky outcroppings. Dangerous terrain, easy to slip, easy to fall. Elias climbed carefully, using his hands as much as his feet, his rifle slung across his back. Below him he heard cursing as his pursuers reached the same rocks. One man was arguing they should wait for daylight. Another, it sounded like Jackson told him to shut up and keep climbing. Elias reached a ledge about 30 feet up and turned to look back. In the moonlight he could see them now, 4 men spread out climbing after him. Warren was third in line, letting his hired men take the risks. Always, the doctor Elias thought bitterly, always letting others bleed. He could pick them off from here, 1 shot each, 4 men dead, before they knew what was happening. It would be easy, simple, the kind of cold-blooded efficiency the war had tried to teach him. But Elias had quit the war specifically to avoid becoming that kind of man. He fired once close enough to Jackson's head to make him yelp and lose his grip. The big man slid 10 feet down the rocks, cursing and scrabbling for purchase. "He's up there on the ledge." Bullets pinged off the rocks around Elias. He ducked back, moved along the ledge, looking for the trail he knew was here somewhere. There, a narrow path barely visible that led up and over the ridge. He took it, moving fast, despite the danger. Behind him, the men were arguing about whether to follow or go around. "He's trying to lose us," Warren's voice. "Don't let him get over that ridge." Elias reached the top and paused, looking back. The burning cabin was a distant glow now, maybe 2 miles away. Clara and the children would be safe in the cellar for now, but only for now. Eventually, someone would search more carefully, find the hidden door, discover them. He needed to end this pursuit, needed to make sure Maxwell's men had no reason to go back. The path ahead dropped down into a narrow valley, then rose again toward the higher peaks. Beyond those peaks, maybe 20 miles as the crow flies, was the Ute winter camp. But 20 miles might as well be 200 with armed men hunting him. Elias made his decision. He'd circle back, attack from behind, thin their numbers. Risky, but it was the only way to change the odds. He moved quietly along the ridge, paralleling his own trail, staying low. The men below were still arguing, their voices carrying clearly in the cold air. "This is pointless. We should go back, search the cabin properly." Warren said, "Follow him, so we follow him." "Warren can go to hell. I'm not chasing some crazy hermit through the mountains in the middle of the night. My arm is still bleeding from where he cut me." That was Jackson. Elias felt a grim satisfaction that his knife work had been effective. "You get paid to follow orders, not to think," a new voice said, one of the Blackwood brothers. "Now move your fat ass and keep climbing." Elias had circled around now, was above and behind them. He could see all four men clearly, Warren hanging back, Jackson still nursing his wounded arm, the two Blackwood brothers in the lead. He picked up a rock, hefted it, then threw it down the slope to their left. The rock clattered and crashed through the brush. All four men spun toward the sound guns raised. "There!" one of the Blackwoods shouted and fired into the darkness. Elias was already moving right, coming down behind them, silent as a ghost. He reached Jackson first, drove the butt of his rifle into the back of the man's head. Jackson went down without a sound. The others turned, but Elias was already on the second Blackwood brother, grabbing the man's gun hand and twisting hard. Bones cracked. The man screamed. Warren and the first Blackwood brother opened fire, but they were too close to their comrade, afraid of hitting him. Elias used the wounded man as a shield, backing away, then threw him at his brother. Both men went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing. Warren stood alone now, his gun pointed at Elias, his hand remarkably steady. "That's enough," Warren said quietly. "Drop the rifle, Boon." Elias didn't move. "I said drop it, or I put a bullet in your chest right now." Elias stared at the man he'd once called a colleague, a friend even. They'd saved lives together, worked through impossible nights, shared the burden of all that death and suffering. And now Warren wanted to murder children for money. Elias opened his mouth. The words were there somewhere deep inside, locked behind 7 years of silence and trauma. He forced them up, forced his broken throat to work. "No." It came out as barely a whisper, rough and painful, but it was a word. The first word he'd spoken in 7 years. Warren's eyes widened. "You can talk. Won't let you hurt them." Each word was agony, like forcing broken glass through his throat. "Hurt them," Warren laughed. "Boon, they're already dead. They just don't know it yet. Maxwell has unlimited resources. He'll send 20 men, 30, however many it takes. You can't protect them." "Can try." "Why?" Warren demanded. "Why throw your life away for strangers? You don't even know these people." Elias thought about Anna's fierce protectiveness, about Clara's determination to keep fighting, despite everything, about 3 younger children who'd done nothing wrong except be born to a father who'd tried to do the right thing. Because someone has to. The words were getting easier, his voice getting stronger. Someone has to stand between evil and innocent. "How noble," Warren sneered, "and how pointless. You're going to die out here, Boon, alone, in the cold, and it won't matter. Those children will still die. Clara Hollander will still die, and Maxwell will still get his mine." "Maybe." Elias's voice was steadier now, the words flowing like water through a broken dam. "But not today, not while I'm breathing." Warren's finger tightened on the trigger, then stopped breathing. The shot rang out. Elias felt the bullet punch into his left shoulder, spinning him around. He went down hard, his rifle flying from his hands. Pain exploded through his chest, white-hot and overwhelming. Warren walked toward him, gun still raised. "I really am sorry about this, Boon. You were a good surgeon, but you chose the wrong side." Elias lay in the snow, blood spreading dark beneath him, his vision swimming. He tried to reach for his knife, but his left arm wouldn't work. Warren stood over him now, pointing the gun at his head. "Any last words, now that you've found your voice again?" Elias looked up at him and smiled. "Yes." "Run." Warren frowned. "Run from what?" Then he heard it, the sound Elias had been waiting for. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats, coming fast from the north. Warren spun around and his face went pale. 6 riders emerged from the tree line, moving in formation like soldiers. But they weren't soldiers. They were Ute warriors dressed for winter hunting, carrying rifles and bows. And leading them was a man Elias recognized even in the darkness. Walking Bear, the Ute chief's brother, the man whose son Elias had saved 3 years ago. Walking Bear rode straight up to Warren, his horse snorting clouds in the cold air. He looked down at Warren with an expression of absolute contempt. "You are on Ute land," Walking Bear said in perfect English. "You are not welcome." Warren tried to recover his composure. "This is territorial land under government jurisdiction. You have no authority here. This land was Ute land for 1,000 years before your government drew lines on paper." Walking Bear's voice was calm but carried an edge that made Warren step back. "And the silent medicine man is under our protection. You have shot him. This is not acceptable." 2 of the warriors had dismounted and were checking on Elias. One of them, a young man Elias recognized as Running Deer, the boy he'd saved, looked up and spoke rapidly in Ute. Walking Bear's expression darkened. "You shot a healer, a man who saves lives. For this, we should kill you here and leave your body for the wolves." Warren raised his gun. "Try it. I've got men coming." An arrow appeared in the snow 6 inches from Warren's boot. He froze. "Your men are being turned back as we speak," Walking Bear said. "The 3 on horses, the others at the burning cabin. We have been watching since sunset. We knew you were coming." He paused. "We know what Maxwell is doing. We know about the sacred sites he destroys, the gold he steals, the lies he tells. The medicine man's friend carries proof of this. Yes." Warren's face had gone from pale to gray. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The woman and her children, the notebook." Walking Bear smiled thinly. "You think we do not have eyes? We have watched Maxwell's camp for months. We know everything." He gestured, and 2 warriors grabbed Warren, stripping him of his weapons. Warren struggled, but it was pointless. "You will return to your employer," Walking Bear said. "You will tell him this. The Ute people know the truth. We have the evidence, we have the witnesses, and we will not allow him to destroy what is sacred. If he sends men to this land again, those men will not return." "Maxwell will bring the army," Warren spat. "He has connections, power. Then let him bring the army. We will take our story to the newspapers, to Washington, to anyone who will listen. We will show them what he has done." Walking Bear leaned down from his horse. "Maxwell has stolen from us for years because we were quiet. We are not quiet anymore." He nodded, and the warriors released Warren, throwing him into the snow. "Go, while you still can." Warren scrambled to his feet and ran stumbling through the snow toward where his men had been. Elias watched him disappear into the darkness, then closed his eyes, the pain in his shoulder overwhelming. He felt hands on him, voices speaking in Ute. Then Walking Bear's face appeared above his. "Medicine man, you are hurt badly." "Clara," Elias whispered. "Children, cabin, root cellar." "We know, we found them, they are safe." Walking Bear smiled. "The fierce little one, Anna, she has much spirit. She wanted to come find you, but we told her no. We told her we would bring you back." "Notebook," Elias managed. "Inside, doll." "Yes, the woman Clara told us everything. The proof we needed." Walking Bear put his hand on Elias's good shoulder. "You have given us a great gift, medicine man. Now let us give you one in return. Let us save your life as you once saved my nephew's." Elias tried to protest that he needed to get back to Clara and the children, that there were things to do, plans to make. But the darkness was closing in, warm and soft, despite the cold, and he couldn't fight it anymore. The last thing he heard was Walking Bear's voice speaking in Ute, and the words somehow made sense, even though he didn't know the language. "Bring him home." When Elias woke, he was looking at the hide ceiling of a Ute winter lodge. Smoke curled up toward the vent hole in the center. His shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent pain that told him he'd been badly hurt but would survive. Someone was singing softly nearby, a woman's voice singing a lullaby in English. Elias turned his head and saw Clara sitting beside him holding sleeping Samuel in her arms. She looked up when he moved and her face broke into a smile of pure relief. "You're awake. Thank God you're awake. How long?" His voice was still rough, but the words came easier now. 3 days. The bullet went through your shoulder, missed anything vital, but you lost a lot of blood. The Ute healer, Quiet Water, she's been tending you. She says you're too stubborn to die. Elias tried to sit up, but Clara shook her head. "Don't. You need rest. Children, safe, all of them. Anna barely leaves your side except to sleep. Thomas and Mary are learning Ute games from the other children. They're actually laughing again." Clara's voice broke. "I didn't think I'd hear them laugh again." Elias reached out with his good hand, and Clara took it, squeezing tight. "You saved us," she said quietly. "You gave up everything, your home, your safety, your silence to save people you didn't even know. Couldn't do nothing. Most people do nothing. Most people look away." She paused. "Walking Bear told me you worked with Dr. Warren during the war, that you trusted him once." Elias nodded, the betrayal still raw. I'm sorry he became what he became. I'm sorry you had to face him. Not your fault." "No, but it was my husband's research that started all this. His determination to do the right thing that got him killed, that put our children in danger." Clara looked down at Samuel, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Sometimes I wonder if John made the right choice. If maybe we should have just stayed quiet, stayed safe." Elias shook his head firmly. "No, he did right. Silence. Silence is surrender. Even when it costs everything. Especially then." Clara smiled through her tears. "You sound like him. You sound like John." The high door of the lodge opened, and Anna came in her arms full of firewood. She saw Elias was awake and dropped the wood, rushing to his side. "You're awake. We thought you were going to sleep forever. The healer said you'd wake up when you were ready, but I was worried." She stopped talking suddenly and threw her arms around him, careful to avoid his injured shoulder. Elias felt the child's tears soaking into his shirt. "I thought you were dead," Anna whispered. "I thought you left us like Papa did." Elias wrapped his good arm around her. "Still here, still keeping my promise." Anna pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Walking Bear says we can stay with the Ute people as long as we need to. He says they're going to help us get to Denver, help us tell everyone what Maxwell did." "The notebook." Anna's face lit up. "Walking Bear has it. He looked at all Papa's drawings and maps and notes. He says it's proof that Maxwell has been stealing from the Ute people for years. He says there are newspapers in Denver that will want this story. He says—" She paused, looking suddenly much older than 7. "He says maybe Papa's death will mean something after all." The high door opened again, and Walking Bear entered, ducking under the low frame. He looked at Elias and nodded with satisfaction. "The medicine man wakes. This is good. We have much to discuss." Clara stood gathering Samuel. "Anna, help me with your brother and siblings. Let's give them time to talk." After they left, Walking Bear sat beside Elias's bed. For a moment neither man spoke. Then Walking Bear said, "My nephew Running Deer says to tell you that you are too old to be fighting like a young warrior. He says next time call for help sooner." Elias smiled despite the pain. "Tell him. Next time I will." "There will not be a next time, not like this." Walking Bear's face grew serious. "Maxwell knows now that we have the evidence. He knows we have the woman and her children under our protection. He could attack, but he is not foolish. An attack on a Ute camp witnessed by the woman and children, that would destroy him, even if he succeeded. So, we are safe. For now, but Maxwell is like a wounded bear, dangerous, unpredictable. We must move carefully." Walking Bear paused. "In 2 weeks, when you are strong enough to travel, we will take you all to Denver. We will bring the notebook to the federal marshal. We will bring the press. We will make Maxwell's crimes public. And if Maxwell runs, if he destroys the evidence at the mine, then we will have the notebook, and we will have the woman's testimony, and we will have something else. Walking Bear smiled grimly. We will have our own witnesses, Ute people who have watched Maxwell destroy sacred sites, who have seen what he has done. White men may not always listen to our voices, but they will listen when those voices speak the same truth as a dead engineer's notebook. Elias felt something shift in his chest. Hope, actual hope for the first time in years. Why? He asked. Why help us? You could have stayed out of this. Walking Bear looked at him for a long moment. 3 years ago, you saved my nephew's life. When I offered payment, you refused. You said healing was not for profit. You said some things should be done simply because they are right. He paused. I asked you then why a white man would help a Ute child. Do you remember what you wrote on your slate? Elias nodded. He remembered. You wrote, because he is a child who needs help. Nothing else matters. Those words stayed with me, medicine man. They reminded me of something my grandfather used to say, that the world is divided not between peoples, but between those who help and those who harm. Walking Bear stood. You chose to help, so we choose to help. It is that simple. After Walking Bear left, Elias lay in the warmth of the lodge, listening to the sounds of the camp outside, children playing, women talking, men preparing for a hunt. A community. A people who had survived centuries of displacement and broken promises, who still somehow maintained their dignity and their sense of justice. He thought about the cabin burning in the night, about the 7 years he'd spent in isolation, about the moment he'd heard a child crying in a blizzard, and made the choice to help instead of walking away. Every choice had led to this moment. Every decision had brought him here. The high door opened again, and Clara returned this time without the children. She sat beside him, her presence steady and calm. Anna told me something, she said quietly. She told me that in the root cellar, while they were hiding, she heard you speak. She heard you tell Dr. Warren no. She heard you defend us. Elias nodded. So it's true, your voice came back. Some of it, still, hurts to talk. But yes, it came back. What made it come back? After all these years, Elias thought about this, thought about the moment he'd opened his mouth to refuse Warren to stand up for what was right despite the cost. Needed to speak more than I needed, to stay silent, he said finally. Some things you cannot whisper. Clara smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. John used to say that too. He used to say silence in the face of injustice is itself a kind of evil. Your husband was a good man. He was, and so are you, Elias Boon. She reached out and touched his hand. The children keep asking me what's going to happen after we get to Denver, after we testify, after all this is over. But what do you tell them? I don't know. I don't know where we'll go, what we'll do. Everything we had is gone, our home, John's salary, any sense of safety or stability. She looked at him. But Anna, she has an idea. She said, maybe we could stay with you. Maybe we could help you rebuild your cabin. Elias felt his throat tighten. Clara, I am a broken man. I live alone. I have nothing to offer. You have everything to offer. Clara interrupted gently. You have courage. You have kindness. You have a sense of right and wrong that you're willing to die for. And you have a voice again, Elias, a voice that can speak truth. I do not know how to be a father, how to be part of a family. Neither do I anymore. John was the one who knew how to fix things, how to make everything all right. Without him, I'm just... She stopped composing herself. I'm just trying to survive. We're all just trying to survive. Elias looked at this woman who had lost everything and still found the strength to keep fighting, to keep her children safe, to keep hoping. Then we survive together, he said. We rebuild, we try. Clara's smile was like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. We try. Yes, that's all anyone can do. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias healed under Quiet Water's skilled care. The Ute healer taught him new techniques for treating wounds, shared knowledge passed down through generations. In return, Elias showed her what he'd learned in the war, how to stop bleeding quickly, how to prevent infection, how to save lives with limited resources. The children flourished in the camp. Thomas learned to make arrows. Mary played with Ute children who didn't speak her language, but communicated perfectly through games and laughter. Samuel learned to walk, taking his first steps in a Ute lodge, surrounded by people who celebrated him like he was one of their own. And Anna, fierce, protective Anna, began to relax. She still watched over her siblings, still carried responsibility beyond her years, but she also played. She also laughed. She also acted like a child instead of a soldier. Clara spent hours with Walking Bear and the other Ute elders, learning their stories, recording their testimonies about Maxwell's crimes. She wrote everything down in careful detail, building a case that went beyond her husband's notebook. Elias watched all of this and felt something he'd thought was dead inside him stir back to life. Purpose, connection, hope. He practiced speaking every day, forcing words through his damaged throat until they came easier. His voice would never be what it was before the war. It would always carry that rough, broken quality. But it was enough. It was his. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Elias stood outside the lodge with Walking Bear, watching the children play. "You are different now," Walking Bear observed. "When you first came to us 3 years ago, you were a ghost. Now you are alive again." "They brought me back," Elias said, nodding toward Clara and the children. "No, you brought yourself back. You chose to help. You chose to speak. You chose to live again." Walking Bear paused. "The path ahead will not be easy. Maxwell will fight. The trial will be difficult. There will be more danger. I know, but you will walk this path anyway." "Yes," Walking Bear smiled. "This is good. The world needs more men who choose the difficult path because it is right, not the easy path because it is safe." 2 weeks after Elias had been shot, the Ute people prepared for the journey to Denver. Walking Bear would lead a delegation of warriors and elders. Clara and her children would travel with them. And Elias, his shoulder still healing but strong enough to ride, would come too. The night before they left, Elias sat with the children by the fire. Anna leaned against him, comfortable now with his presence. Thomas was showing him the arrows he'd made. Mary had insisted he hold her doll, the doll that held the notebook that would bring down an empire. "Are you scared?" Anna asked quietly. "About tomorrow." Elias thought about his answer carefully. "Yes." "But you're going anyway." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd kept her family alive through intelligence and determination and sheer will. "Because some things are more important than fear," he said. "Justice, truth, protecting people who cannot protect themselves. These things matter more than being safe." Anna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Papa used to say something like that. He said, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." "Your father was right. I wish you could have met him. I think you would have been friends." Elias put his good arm around her shoulders. "I think so too." Clara appeared in the doorway of the lodge. "Children, time for bed. We have a long journey tomorrow." The children groaned but obeyed, filing into the lodge. Anna paused at the door and looked back at Elias. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." After the children were settled, Clara came back out and sat beside Elias by the dying fire. "Tomorrow we face Maxwell's empire," she said. "Tomorrow we try to bring down a man who has the governor in his pocket, who has unlimited resources, who has already killed once to protect his secrets." "Yes." "Are we going to win?" Elias looked at the stars emerging in the darkening sky, at the mountains rising black against the horizon, at the Ute camp where people were preparing for a fight they shouldn't have to face but would face anyway because it was right. "I do not know," he said honestly, "but we will try. And sometimes trying is enough." Clara took his hand. "John would have liked you very much." "You have said that before." "I'll probably say it again," she smiled. "Elias, when this is over, if we survive this, I need you to know something." "What?" "You're not alone anymore. You have us. We're your family now if you want us. You don't have to go back to living in isolation, to being silent, to hiding from the world." Elias felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I am not good at family. I have been alone so long. So have we in our own way. Since John died, we've been alone too, but maybe together we can figure out how to be not alone." Clara squeezed his hand. "You saved our lives, Elias. Let us save yours in return." He couldn't speak. The words were there, but emotion had stolen them away. Instead, he just nodded and squeezed her hand back. They sat together in the firelight, two broken people who'd found each other through tragedy and violence, who'd chosen to fight instead of flee, who'd discovered that sometimes the family you make is stronger than the family you're born with. Tomorrow they would ride to Denver. Tomorrow they would face Maxwell and his empire. Tomorrow they would risk everything for justice. But tonight, they had each other. And for now, that was enough. The journey to Denver took 12 days. They traveled in a group of 26 Ute warriors, led by Walking Bear, 3 elders who would testify about the sacred sites Maxwell had destroyed Clara and her 4 children and Elias. They moved carefully, avoiding the main roads where Maxwell's men might be watching, taking trails that only the Ute knew. The first 3 days were the hardest for Elias. His shoulder protested every movement, every jolt of the horse beneath him, but he gritted his teeth and kept riding. Complaining would only slow them down, and they couldn't afford delays. Anna rode behind Walking Bear, her small hands gripping his waist as she peppered him with questions about everything they passed. The Ute warrior answered each one with patience that surprised Elias. "How do you know which plants are safe to eat?" "My grandmother taught me. Each plant has a purpose, a spirit. You must learn to listen." "Can you teach me?" Walking Bear glanced back at her and smiled. "You ask many questions, little one. This is good. Questions are how we learn." Thomas rode with Running Deer, the young Ute warrior who Elias had saved 3 years ago. The 2 boys had become fast friends despite the language barrier, communicating through gestures and shared laughter. Mary and Samuel rode in a travois pulled by one of the horses bundled in furs and blankets. Mary still clutched her doll, never letting it out of her sight. Inside that doll was the evidence that would either save them or get them all killed. Clara rode beside Elias, her face set with determination despite the exhaustion that pulled at her features. She'd been strong for so long, fought for so long. Elias worried about what would happen when she finally allowed herself to break. On the 4th day, they spotted riders in the distance. Walking Bear raised his hand and the group stopped immediately. Everyone went silent, even the children. Years of survival had taught them when to be quiet. 3 riders, Running Deer said softly, coming from the south. "Maxwell's men?" Clara asked, her voice tight. Walking Bear shook his head. "Too far to tell, but we should not wait to find out." He gestured to a narrow canyon to their left. "Through there, quickly." They moved into the canyon, the horses' hooves echoing off the stone walls. It was darker here, colder, the sun blocked by the high walls. Anna pressed closer to Walking Bear, her earlier curiosity replaced by fear. The riders passed by the canyon entrance without slowing. Either they hadn't seen the group or they were following a different trail. But the encounter rattled everyone. Maxwell's reach was long. His resources were vast. They were still 5 days from Denver, and anything could happen in 5 days. That night they made camp in a sheltered valley. No fire too risky. They ate cold rations and huddled under blankets against the freezing temperature. Elias sat with Clara while the children slept between them, their small bodies pressed together for warmth. "I keep thinking about John," Clara said quietly. "About the night before he died. He came home late, covered in dust from the mine. He looked at me and said, 'Clara, I found something that changes everything.' I asked him what, and he said, 'The truth. And the truth is going to get me killed.'" Her voice broke. Elias reached over and took her hand. "I begged him not to go back to the mine. I begged him to run, to take us somewhere safe. But he said if he ran, Maxwell would just find someone else to silence. He said the only way to stop men like Maxwell was to expose them." She looked at Elias, tears freezing on her cheeks. Was he right? Or did he just throw his life away? Elias thought carefully about his answer. He was right, but that doesn't make it hurt less. "I'm so angry at him," Clara whispered. "I'm angry that he chose truth over safety, that he chose principle over his family, that he left me alone with 4 children and enemies hunting us." She wiped her eyes roughly. "Is that terrible to be angry at a dead man for being brave?" "No, it's human. I loved him so much. I still love him. But I'm so angry." Elias squeezed her hand. "You can be both. Love and anger, they can exist together. John made a choice that was right and also terrible. He saved his soul, but broke your heart. Both things are true." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that for a long time, 2 people bound together by loss and determination, watching over children who deserved better than the world they'd been given. The next morning, Walking Bear called Elias aside. "We are being followed," the Ute warrior said without preamble. 2 men, maybe 3. They stay far back, but they are there. "Maxwell's men. Who else?" Walking Bear's face was grim. "They are not trying to catch us, just watching, waiting, maybe to see where we go, who we meet in Denver." "What do? We set a trap." Walking Bear smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Tonight, we make camp early. We build a fire act like we suspect nothing, and then we see who comes visiting." Elias felt his stomach tighten. More violence, more bloodshed. He'd hoped they could reach Denver without another confrontation, but hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. That evening, they made camp in an open area near a frozen stream. Walking Bear built a large fire, deliberately obvious. The children were moved to the center of the camp, surrounded by warriors. Clara stayed with them, her face pale but resolute. Elias checked his rifle and took position behind a boulder at the edge of the firelight. His shoulder ached, but he could shoot well enough with his good arm. Running Deer crouched beside him. "You are nervous," the young warrior observed. Elias nodded. "This is good. Fear keeps you alert. It is the men who are not afraid who die first." Running Deer paused. 3 years ago, when the fever had me, I heard you talking to my uncle. You thought I was too sick to understand, but I heard. You told him you were afraid I would die. You told him you were afraid of failing again." Elias looked at the young man, surprised. He'd thought Running Deer had been unconscious during those dark days. "You were afraid, but you kept working. You kept trying. That is true courage, not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear stop you." Running Deer smiled. "My uncle says you are a warrior who heals instead of harms. I think he is right." Before Elias could respond, Walking Bear whistled softly the signal. Someone was coming. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, moving cautiously toward the fire. They weren't trying to hide anymore. They'd decided confrontation was inevitable. Walking Bear stood up, his rifle loose in his hands, but ready. "That is close enough, I think." The 3 men stopped. Even in the firelight, Elias recognized one of them, the Blackwood brother he'd fought at the cabin, the one whose wrist he'd broken. The man's hand was still bandaged. "We don't want trouble," one of the other men said. He was older, with gray in his beard and the look of someone who'd been a soldier once. "We just want to talk to the woman." "The woman does not want to talk to you," Walking Bear said pleasantly. Maxwell sent us with the message and an offer. We are not interested in Maxwell's offers. The older man sighed. Look, I get it. You're protecting her and the kids, noble and all that. But Maxwell always gets what he wants. Always. You can either take his offer and walk away with money in your pockets, or you can refuse and end up dead. Those are the only two options. There is a third option, Walking Bear said. We continue to Denver. We give the evidence to the federal marshal. We expose what Maxwell has done, and men like you find new employers who do not murder families. The Blackwood brothers spat. You're dead men, all of you. You just don't know it yet. We have heard these threats before, Walking Bear said. They bore us. The older man held up his hands. All right, no threats. Just listen to the offer. Yeah, Maxwell knows he can't stop you from going to Denver. Fine, go to Denver. But the notebook, the woman's husband's notebook, Maxwell will pay $50,000 for that notebook. $50,000. That's enough to set the woman and her kids up for life. Enough for all of you to disappear, start over somewhere safe. Clara stood up from where she'd been sitting with the children. She walked to the edge of the firelight, and Elias could see the fury in her eyes. My husband is dead because of what's in that notebook, she said, her voice cutting through the night like a blade. You think I'd sell his memory for money? You think I'd let Maxwell keep destroying people, keep stealing, keep killing just so I could have a comfortable life? Lady, your husband is dead. Nothing you do will bring him back. No, but I can make sure he didn't die for nothing. Clara's voice shook, but not with fear, with rage. Tell Maxwell he can take his $50,000 and choke on it. Tell him I'm going to stand in front of a judge and tell everyone what he did. Tell him I'm going to make sure my children grow up in a world where monsters like him face consequences. The Blackwood brother laughed. Brave words. Let's see if you're still talking tough when Maxwell's men come for your kids. Elias stood up, then stepping into the firelight. His rifle was pointed directly at Blackwood's chest. If anyone touches those children, Elias said, his voice rough but clear, they will answer to me, and I promise you I am very good at making people suffer before they die. It was a bluff. Elias had no intention of torturing anyone, but these men didn't know that. They saw a man who'd fought off 4 attackers who'd survived being shot, who'd come back from 7 years of silence with ice in his eyes and a steady hand on his weapon. The older man swallowed hard. All right, message delivered. We're leaving. Tell Maxwell something else, Walking Bear said as the 3 men backed away. Tell him the Ute people are watching. Tell him we know about the gold he hides from the government. Tell him we know about the sacred burial grounds he destroyed to get to it. Tell him his empire is built on theft and lies, and empires like that always fall. The men disappeared into the darkness. The camp remained silent for several minutes, everyone listening, waiting to see if they'd come back with reinforcements. But they didn't. They'd delivered their message and left, probably reporting back to Maxwell that the situation was hopeless, that Clara and her protectors couldn't be bought or scared off. Anna appeared beside Elias, looking up at him with wide eyes. You wouldn't really make people suffer, would you, before they died? Elias knelt down so he was at her level. No, I wouldn't. I said that to scare them. But you looked like you meant it. Sometimes, Elias said carefully, you have to make bad people believe you're capable of the things they're capable of. Otherwise, they don't take you seriously. Anna thought about this. Papa said something like that once. He said you have to know how to speak the language of bullies even if you never actually use the words. Your father was a smart man. I wish I could remember him better, Anna said quietly. It's only been a few weeks, but already some things are getting fuzzy. Like I remember his voice, but I can't remember what he sounded like when he laughed. Is that normal? Elias felt his heart break a little. Yes, that's normal. But that's why we have to keep telling stories about the people we love, so we don't forget. Will you tell me stories about him? Mama tells us stories, but she cries when she does, and that makes me sad. I never met your father, Elias said gently, But I can tell you what I see in you and your mother and your siblings. I can tell you about the man who raised a daughter brave enough to keep her family alive through a blizzard, about the man who chose truth over safety, justice over silence, about the man whose love was so strong that it carried his family through the darkness, even after he was gone. Anna's eyes filled with tears. That's a good story. It's the best story, and it's true. She hugged him then, this fierce little girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who carried weights no child should carry. Elias held her with his good arm and wished he could promise her that everything would be all right, that the world would be fair, that bad people would always face consequences. But he couldn't promise that. All he could promise was that he'd keep fighting, that he'd keep trying, that he wouldn't let her face the darkness alone. The next 5 days passed without incident. They saw no more riders, encountered no more threats, but the tension never left. Everyone knew that Denver was where the real battle would begin. On the 12th day, the city appeared on the horizon. Elias had been to Denver once years ago before the war. It had been a rough mining town then, all mud streets and canvas tents and desperate men. Now it had grown into something more: wooden buildings, a courthouse, hotels, even a newspaper office. Walking Bear led them to the edge of town and stopped. From here we must be careful. Maxwell has eyes everywhere. We must go directly to the federal marshal's office, nowhere else. What if the marshal is in Maxwell's pocket too? Clara asked. The fear in her voice was palpable. They'd come so far, risked so much. If the law was corrupt, if Maxwell had already bought the marshal's loyalty, then everything had been for nothing. Then we go to the newspapers, Walking Bear said. We go to the churches, we go to the territorial governor himself if we must. Maxwell cannot have bought everyone. Elias wasn't so sure about that. Power and money bought a lot of loyalty, but they'd come too far to turn back now. They rode into Denver in formation, the Ute warriors surrounding Clara and the children like a living shield. People stopped to stare. A woman with 4 children accompanied by Ute warriors and a rough-looking man in furs was unusual enough to draw attention. Good, Elias thought. Let them stare, let them see. The more witnesses, the harder it would be for Maxwell to make them disappear. The federal marshal's office was a small wooden building near the courthouse. Walking Bear dismounted and helped Clara down from her horse. The children clung to her skirts, sensing the importance of this moment. Elias checked his rifle one more time, then followed them inside. The marshal was a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a gray mustache. He looked up from his desk as they entered, and his expression went from bored to wary to alarmed in quick succession. "What's this about?" he asked, his hand moving toward the gun on his desk. Walking Bear stepped forward. "We are here to report crimes. Theft, murder, destruction of treaty-protected land. We have evidence." The marshal's eyes narrowed. "Evidence of what?" Clara stepped forward then, and Elias saw her pull strength from somewhere deep inside. "My name is Clara Hollander. My husband, John Hollander, was murdered 6 weeks ago by men working for Ezra Maxwell. Before he died, John documented years of illegal mining on Ute tribal land, theft of gold from the federal government, and the destruction of protected sacred sites. I have that documentation, and I'm here to see that Maxwell faces justice." The marshal stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Mrs. Hollander, do you have any idea what you're accusing Maxwell of? The man practically owns this territory." "I know exactly what I'm accusing him of. Murder, theft, fraud." Clara's voice didn't waver. "And I have proof." She nodded to Anna, who carefully pulled the doll from her coat. The little girl's hand shook as she tore open the seam of the doll and pulled out the notebook pages of careful engineering notes, maps, calculations, evidence of every crime Maxwell had committed. Clara placed it on the marshal's desk. "That's my husband's blood on the cover," she said quietly. "He was clutching it when they killed him. He died protecting that notebook because he believed the truth mattered more than his own life." The marshal picked up the notebook with careful hands, as if it were something holy. He opened it, began to read. His face went pale. "My God," he whispered, "if this is real, if even half of this is real." "It's all real," Clara said. "Every word, every map, every calculation. John spent 2 years documenting Maxwell's crimes, and Maxwell killed him for it." The marshal looked up at Walking Bear. "You're willing to testify about the sacred sites. We are, and we have others who will testify as well. Ute elders who watched Maxwell's men destroy burial grounds, who saw them steal gold from land that was promised to our people by treaty." The marshal sat back in his chair, looking overwhelmed. This is bigger than me, bigger than this office. We need to take this to the territorial judge. We need—" He stopped, shaking his head. "Maxwell has connections. He has power. The moment we move against him, he'll know. He'll run, or he'll destroy evidence, or he'll try to kill us," Clara finished. "Again, yes, we know. I can't protect you. I don't have the resources. Maxwell has hired guns, connections, money. We do not need your protection," Walking Bear said. "We need you to do your job. Take this evidence to the judge. File the charges. Let the law work as it was meant to work." The marshal looked at them, at Clara with her 4 children, at the Ute warriors who'd traveled 12 days to seek justice, at Elias, standing silent and watchful by the door. "All right," he said finally. "All right, I'll take this to Judge Morrison first thing tomorrow morning. He's honest, one of the few who can't be bought. But Mrs. Hollander, you and your children need to stay somewhere safe tonight, somewhere Maxwell's men can't reach you." "We will stay at the church," Walking Bear said. "The priest there, Father O'Brien, he is a friend to the Ute people. He will shelter us." The marshal nodded. "Good. Go there now. Don't talk to anyone. Don't let anyone know you're in town if you can help it." He looked at Clara. "Mrs. Hollander, what you've done here, bringing this evidence, standing up to Maxwell, it's either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most foolish. Maybe both." Clara smiled, but there was no humor in it. "My husband used to say that bravery and foolishness look the same until the ending is written." They left the marshal's office and made their way to St. Mary's Church on the far side of town. Father O'Brien was a thin man with kind eyes who took one look at their group and ushered them inside without questions. "You're in trouble," he said simply. "What kind?" Walking Bear explained briefly. The priest's face grew grave. "Maxwell," he said quietly. "I've heard stories, confessions, things I can't repeat, but—" He looked at Clara and her children. "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The church is sanctuary. Even Maxwell's men won't dare violate that." That night they made beds in the church basement. It was cold but dry, and after 12 days of sleeping under stars and traveling through some snow, it felt like luxury. The children fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the journey. Clara sat with them for a long time, stroking their hair, singing softly. Elias found Walking Bear standing at the basement window, looking out at the dark street. "You are worried," Elias said. "Maxwell knows we are here by now. He has eyes everywhere. He knows we went to the marshal." Walking Bear's jaw was tight. "Tomorrow, when the charges are filed, he will act. He will try to stop this however he can." "Will the judge act quickly?" "Judge Morrison is known for his speed. If he reads the evidence tonight, he could issue arrest warrants by morning." Walking Bear paused. "But speed may not be enough. Maxwell is like a snake. When cornered, he strikes." Elias thought about Warren, about the other men who'd tried to take the notebook, about the cold calculation in their eyes. Walking Bear was right. Maxwell wouldn't surrender. He'd fight with everything he had. "Then we prepare," Elias said. "We watch, we protect." Walking Bear looked at him. "You have changed much, Medicine Man. When I first met you 3 years ago, you were a ghost hiding in the mountains. Now you stand ready to fight." "I had no reason to fight then. Now I do." "The woman and her children," Elias nodded, "and justice and truth, and the belief that maybe, just maybe, the world can be better than it is." Walking Bear smiled. These are good reasons, worth fighting for, worth dying for, if necessary. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But both men knew it might. Both men knew that tomorrow, when the judge read the evidence and issued his ruling, the real battle would begin. Clara appeared beside them, moving quietly so as not to wake the children. "We should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow will be hard. Tomorrow will change everything," Walking Bear said. "One way or another." Clara looked at the two men who'd helped her survive, who'd protected her children, who'd risked everything for justice. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you both to know thank you for everything, for being brave when I couldn't be, for fighting when I was too broken to fight, for reminding me that there are still good people in the world." Elias wanted to tell her that she'd been the brave one, that she'd never stopped fighting, that she'd saved herself more than anyone had saved her, but the words stuck in his throat, rough and painful despite weeks of practice. Walking Bear spoke for both of them. "You honor us with your trust, Clara Hollander. Your husband chose well when he chose you, and his children are fortunate to have a mother with such strength." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Tomorrow we finish what John started. Tomorrow we make his death mean something." Tomorrow, Elias thought. Tomorrow everything changes. He just hoped they'd all survive to see what came after. Morning came with church bells ringing across Denver. Elias hadn't slept. He'd spent the night watching the street, his rifle across his knees, waiting for Maxwell's men to come. But the night had passed quietly, and now dawn was breaking over the city. Clara woke the children gently. They dressed in silence, sensing the weight of what was coming. Even Samuel seemed subdued, clinging to his mother without his usual babbling. Father O'Brien brought them bread and coffee. "The marshal sent word an hour ago," the priest said quietly. "Judge Morrison read the notebook through the night. He's issuing arrest warrants this morning for Maxwell, for Dr. Warren, for the mine foreman, all of them." Clara closed her eyes, and Elias saw relief wash over her face. "Thank God." "But there's more," Father O'Brien continued. "The judge wants you to testify today. He's calling an emergency hearing. He says if the evidence is as damning as it appears, he wants to move fast before Maxwell can destroy anything else or flee the territory." Walking Bear stood up. "Then we go to the courthouse. Now." They gathered the children and prepared to leave. Anna helped dress Mary and Samuel while Thomas stood close to Elias, his small hand gripping the hem of Elias's coat. "Are we going to be safe?" the boy asked quietly. Elias knelt down beside him. "I will do everything I can to keep you safe, I promise." "But you can't promise we'll be okay." "Not really." The boy was right. Elias couldn't promise that. He'd learned long ago that some promises were impossible to keep no matter how much you wanted to. "No," Elias said honestly, "I can't promise that, but I can promise I won't stop trying, and sometimes that has to be enough." Thomas nodded, accepting this truth with a maturity that broke Elias's heart. They left the church in formation again, Ute warriors surrounding Clara and the children, Elias and Walking Bear at the front. The streets of Denver were waking up, people starting their daily routines, unaware that today would change everything. The courthouse was a two-story wooden building at the center of town. A crowd had already gathered outside. Word had spread fast about the hearing. Elias saw miners, shopkeepers, even a few well-dressed men who looked like they might be politicians or businessmen. And standing at the edge of the crowd, watching them approach with cold eyes, was Dr. Warren. Clara saw him at the same moment and grabbed Elias's arm. "He's here! Warren's here! I see him." Warren made no move to approach or flee. He just stood there, his face expressionless as they passed. But Elias felt the hatred radiating from the man, the promise of violence barely contained. Inside the courthouse, Marshal Hayes met them at the door. "The judge is ready. Mrs. Hollander, you'll testify first, then Walking Bear and the Ute elders, then—" He looked at Elias. "The judge wants to hear from you, too, about what happened at your cabin, about Warren's involvement." Elias nodded. The thought of speaking publicly, of using his broken voice in front of a crowd, terrified him, but he'd face that fear. For Clara, for the children, for justice. Judge Morrison was a stern-looking man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He sat behind his bench, John Hollander's notebook open before him, his face grave. "This court is now in session," he said, his voice carrying through the packed courtroom. "We are here to examine evidence of serious crimes allegedly committed by Ezra Maxwell and his associates. Mrs. Clara Hollander, please approach." Clara stood, her legs trembling slightly. Anna reached up and squeezed her mother's hand. "Be brave, Mama," the little girl whispered, "like Papa would want." Clara nodded, kissed her daughter's forehead, and walked to the witness stand. For the next hour, she told her story. She spoke about John's growing concern over what he'd discovered at the mine, about his careful documentation of the illegal operations, about the night he came home and told her he'd found something that would get him killed. Her voice broke when she described hearing about his death, the mine foreman claiming it was an accident, her knowing in her heart it was murder. She described the men who came to her home demanding the notebook. Warren's betrayal, a man John had trusted, had called friend. The attack that left her beaten and her wagon pushed off a cliff in the blizzard. "They were going to let us freeze to death," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "My children, they were going to kill my children to protect Maxwell's secrets." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the judge had tears in his eyes. "And then this man found us." Clara pointed to Elias, a stranger who owed us nothing, who had every reason to turn away to stay out of Maxwell's business. But he didn't. He saved us. He protected us. He gave up his home, his safety, everything, so that we could be here today, so that the truth could be told. Judge Morrison looked at Elias. "Is this true, Mr. Boon? You sheltered this family knowing Maxwell would come after you." Elias stood slowly. His throat felt tight, the words locked behind years of silence and fear, but he forced them out rough and broken, but clear. "Yes, it's true. And can you tell the court what happened when Maxwell's men came to your cabin?" Elias walked to the front of the courtroom. Every eye was on him. He could feel the weight of their attention, the expectations, the hope. He told them about finding Clara and the children in the blizzard, about the men who came searching for them, about Warren, his former colleague, offering money in exchange for the notebook, threatening violence when Elias refused. He said children were acceptable casualties. Elias said, his voice growing stronger with anger. He said Maxwell always gets what he wants. That murder was just business. The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. "Order, I will have order." He looked at the marshal. "Is Dr. Warren in this courtroom?" "He was outside, Your Honor." "Find him, arrest him, now." The marshal and 2 deputies rushed out. Elias returned to his seat beside Clara and the children. Anna was crying silently, and he put his arm around her shoulders. Walking Bear testified next, describing years of watching Maxwell's operation destroy sacred Ute sites. He presented maps showing the boundaries of treaty-protected land and how Maxwell had deliberately violated those boundaries. He spoke about burial grounds destroyed, about gold stolen, about promises broken. "The white man's government made us many promises." Walking Bear said, his voice heavy with centuries of betrayal. "Most of those promises were lies, but John Hollander was not a liar. He saw what was wrong and tried to make it right. He died for that choice. The least we can do is honor his memory by ensuring his death meant something." The Ute elders testified after Walking Bear, each one adding more evidence, more testimony, more proof of Maxwell's crimes. By noon, the case against Maxwell was overwhelming. Judge Morrison called for a recess. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour. Marshal Hayes, I want Ezra Maxwell brought here to answer these charges. Use whatever force is necessary." During the break, Father O'Brien brought food for the children. They ate in a small room off the courthouse, away from the crowds and the tension. "How much longer?" Mary asked, her voice small. Not much longer, Clara said, stroking her daughter's hair. Soon this will all be over and we can start to heal. But Elias noticed Walking Bear and Running Deer, conferring quietly in the corner, their expressions troubled. He joined them. What's wrong? Maxwell has not come to the courthouse, Walking Bear said. His men have not been seen. The marshal sent deputies to his office, to his home. He is not there. He's running. Or preparing to fight? Walking Bear's jaw was tight. A cornered animal is most dangerous. Before Elias could respond, they heard shouting from outside. Gunshots cracked through the air. Elias was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Stay here, he told Clara. Keep the children down. He and Walking Bear rushed to the courthouse entrance. Outside, chaos had erupted. Men were running through the streets, some toward the gunfire, some away from it. Marshal Hayes appeared, his face grim. It's Maxwell. He's holed up at the mine office with 20 armed men. Says he won't be taken alive. Says if we try to arrest him, he'll burn every piece of evidence and kill anyone who gets in his way. He's insane, someone said. No, Elias said quietly. He's desperate. Desperate men do desperate things. Judge Morrison appeared at the courthouse door. This ends now. Marshal, gather every able-bodied man who can hold a weapon. We're going to the mine office. Maxwell will answer for his crimes one way or another. Walking Bear looked at Elias. The children should stay here, safe. But Clara had appeared behind them, her children gathered close. No, she said firmly. We've come this far together. We finish it together. Clara, it's too dangerous. Everywhere is dangerous when Maxwell is free. Her voice was steel. If he wins today, if he escapes or destroys the evidence, my children will never be safe. We have to end this. Now. Elias wanted to argue, wanted to make her stay where it was safe. But he saw the determination in her eyes and knew arguing was pointless. Then we protect them, he said simply. Whatever happens, we protect the children. They moved through Denver's streets toward the mine office, a growing crowd following behind them. Word had spread Ezra Maxwell, the man who'd owned half the territory, through fear and money, was making his last stand. The mine office was a large wooden building at the edge of town. Smoke was already rising from inside. Maxwell was burning documents, destroying evidence. 20 armed men stood in formation outside the building, rifles ready. In the center of them stood Maxwell himself, a tall man with gray hair and cold eyes, dressed in an expensive suit that seemed absurd in the circumstances. Judge Morrison stepped forward. Ezra Maxwell, you are under arrest for murder, theft, fraud, and destruction of treaty-protected land. Surrender now and face justice. Maxwell laughed. Justice from you? You're a territorial judge in a nowhere town. I own the governor. I own half the legislature. Your warrant isn't worth the paper it's printed on. The evidence is overwhelming. The testimony is clear. You've lost Maxwell. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left. I've lost nothing. Maxwell's voice rose to a shout. I built an empire from nothing. I created wealth, jobs, progress, and you want to destroy all of that because some self-righteous engineer couldn't mind his own business. Clara pushed through the crowd, standing beside the judge. You murdered my husband. You tried to murder my children. That's not progress. That's evil. Maxwell's eyes found Clara, and something like recognition crossed his face. Mrs. Hollander, I'm sorry about John. I truly am. He was brilliant. If he'd just been willing to look the other way, to accept that sometimes progress requires compromise, he'd still be alive. Compromise, Clara's voice shook with rage. You call murder compromise. You call stealing from indigenous people progress. My husband was worth 100 of you. 1,000 of you. Your husband was a fool who didn't understand how the world works. And now he's dead, and you're a widow with 4 hungry children. How noble does principle feel now, Mrs. Hollander? Before Clara could respond, Anna broke free from Thomas's hand and ran forward. My papa wasn't a fool. He was brave. He was good. And we're going to make sure everyone knows what you did. Maxwell looked at the 7-year-old girl with something like amusement. How touching. The orphaned child defending her dead father's honor. Elias stepped forward, then putting himself between Anna and Maxwell. The child has more honor in her smallest finger than you have in your entire body. Maxwell's expression hardened. The mute mountain man who learned to talk. How poetic. Tell me, Boon, was it worth it giving up your peaceful isolation to play hero? Because here's what's going to happen. My men are going to start shooting and people are going to die. Maybe you, maybe the woman, maybe those children you're so desperate to protect. Or maybe you and your men surrender, Elias said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Maybe you face justice instead of adding more bodies to your count. Maxwell shook his head. I don't surrender. I don't lose. I'd rather die than spend the rest of my life in prison. He looked at his men. When I give the word, shoot anyone who comes closer, starting with the woman and her brats. The armed men raised their rifles. The crowd began to back away, fear rippling through them. Judge Morrison raised his hand. Maxwell, if your men fire, the territorial militia will respond. This will become a bloodbath. Is that really how you want this to end? If I'm going down, everyone's coming with me. Elias felt time slow down. He could see Maxwell's finger tightening on his rifle trigger, could see Clara pulling her children back toward safety, could see Walking Bear and the Ute warriors preparing to return fire, and he knew with absolute certainty that if shooting started, people would die. Innocent people, children. He couldn't let that happen. Elias stepped forward, the hands raised, walking directly toward Maxwell's armed men. What are you doing? Clara screamed. Elias, stop. But he kept walking, one step, another. The rifles tracked him, 20 guns pointed at his chest. I'm unarmed, Elias called out, his voice carrying across the street. I just want to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Maxwell said. Yes, there is. Elias stopped 10 feet from Maxwell's line of men. You said John Hollander was a fool for choosing principle over survival, but he wasn't a fool, he was brave. He knew the cost and paid it anyway. That's not foolishness. That's courage. Courage doesn't stop bullets. No, but it means something. It changes things. John's courage brought his wife and children through a blizzard. It brought the Ute people to seek justice. It brought a man who'd been silent for 7 years back to the world of the living. His courage created ripples that reached farther than he ever knew. Maxwell's expression flickered just for a moment with something that might have been doubt. You can kill me, Elias continued. You can kill Clara and her children. You can kill everyone here, but John's notebook is already in federal hands. The evidence is recorded. The story is told. You've already lost Maxwell. The only question now is how many innocent people die because you're too proud to admit it. The silence stretched out. Elias could hear his own heartbeat, could feel sweat running down his back despite the cold. Then from behind Maxwell's line, Dr. Warren stepped forward. He's right, Warren said quietly. It's over, Maxwell. We've lost. Maxwell spun toward him. You coward. I'm done, Warren said. I'm done with the killing, the lying, all of it. I became a doctor to save lives, and instead I've helped you destroy them. John Hollander was my friend, and I betrayed him. I have to live with that forever, but I don't have to add more deaths to my conscience. Warren lowered his rifle. I'm surrendering, and I'm testifying against you. I'm telling them everything. For a moment, Maxwell looked like he might shoot Warren himself. But then the other armed men began lowering their weapons too. One by one, they gave up, unwilling to die for a cause that was already lost. Maxwell stood alone, his rifle still raised, his face twisted with fury and defeat. You've destroyed everything I built, he said to Elias. No, you destroyed it yourself. We just made sure people knew. Maxwell's rifle wavered, then slowly he lowered it. I want a lawyer, and I want guarantees. You'll get a trial, Judge Morrison said, stepping forward. That's more than you gave John Hollander. The marshal and his deputies moved in, arresting Maxwell and his men. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts. But Elias just turned and walked back to where Clara and the children waited. Anna threw herself into his arms crying. Thomas and Mary pressed against his sides. Even little Samuel reached out wanting to be held. Clara stood watching them, tears streaming down her face. When Elias looked at her over the children's heads, she mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." The trial took 3 weeks. Warren testified just as he'd promised, detailing years of illegal operations and Maxwell's direct order to kill John Hollander. The Ute elders provided maps and testimony. Clara's voice never wavered as she described her husband's murder and the attack on her family. The evidence from John's notebook was damning and thorough. Every illegal mine, every sacred site destroyed, every ounce of stolen gold. Maxwell was convicted of murder, theft, fraud, and violations of federal treaty law. The judge sentenced him to life in prison. His empire was dismantled, his assets seized, his name forever attached to corruption and greed. 6 months later, on a spring morning with new grass pushing through the melted snow, Elias stood on a hillside overlooking a valley the Ute people had named Reconciliation Valley. Clara stood beside him watching as Thomas and Anna helped Walking Bear and Running Deer plant the first fence posts for their new home. Mary was teaching Samuel how to make flower chains. The children were laughing, real, genuine laughter that came from hearts beginning to heal. "John would have loved this place," Clara said quietly. "He always dreamed of having land of our own, raising the children somewhere beautiful. He'd be proud of you, of what you did. We did it together, all of us." She looked at Elias. "I meant what I said 6 months ago. You're family now, not because of what you did for us, but because of who you are, because you chose to care when you could have chosen to stay hidden." Elias thought about the man he'd been when he'd first heard Anna crying in that blizzard. Silent, broken, hiding from the world and from himself. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the violence and fear, yes, but also the courage and hope. The connections forged through shared struggle. His voice was still rough, still bore the scars of 7 years of silence. But it was his voice, and he'd learned how to use it again. "I was alone so long I forgot what it meant to be part of something bigger than myself," he said. "You and the children, you reminded me. You gave me a reason to speak again, to fight again, to live again." Anna appeared beside them, dirt on her face and joy in her eyes. "Elias Walking Bear says we need to dig the well tomorrow. Will you help?" "Of course. And then we start building the house, right? With rooms for everyone and a library like you had in your cabin, because Mama says education is important." "Yes, all of that." Anna grinned and ran back to her siblings, already explaining the next phase of construction in elaborate detail. Clara slipped her hand into Elias's. "This is what John's voice was waiting for, isn't it? The chance to build something good, to create instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm." Elias looked at the valley spread before them, at the Ute families who'd given them this land as restitution, at the children, playing in the spring sunshine, at the fresh timber, waiting to become walls and roof and home. 7 years ago, he'd lost his voice trying to save a dying soldier in a burning tent. He'd believed the words were gone forever, burned away by trauma and loss. But Clara was right. His voice had just been waiting for something worth speaking for, waiting for a family worth protecting, waiting for a love worth rebuilding his life around. "I've been silent long enough," Elias said, squeezing Clara's hand. "This is what my voice was waiting for. This is what all of it, the pain, the fear, the journey was leading to." In the distance, Walking Bear raised his hand in greeting. The children's laughter echoed across the valley. The sun warmed the earth, promising growth and renewal. And Elias Boon, the silent medicine man who'd learned to speak again, smiled at the family he'd saved, and the family who'd saved him in return, and knew with absolute certainty that some things, justice, truth, love, and the courage to stand against darkness were always worth fighting for, always worth speaking for, always worth coming home for.